In our last class, we made good progress in our study of John chapter 4. I'd like to try to finish that off this morning. There are actually two miracles found in John chapter 4. One miracle is a spoken miracle, and the second miracle is a miracle of healing the nobleman's son who was sick and who died at the end of the chapter. We are taking the basic sign in John chapter 4 from the miracle of Jesus speaking to the woman things that she would not otherwise have known. We have traced in John chapter 4 the woman's growth in perception of who Jesus Christ was, from being an extraordinary Jewish man to being a prophet in her perception, to being Messiah. And the sign of a prophet, therefore, is telling all things, or the sign of Messiah is telling all things. Now, I'm not sure if we brought this out in any of our other studies, but if you'll just hold your finger here in John chapter 4 and go back to Deuteronomy chapter 18. I'd like to read a significant passage of Scripture that I believe explains the relationship between the two seemingly unconnected miracles in John chapter 4. In the first part of chapter 4, the main miracle with Jesus and the woman is a spoken word, revolves around a spoken word. Jesus is in Sychar in Samaria. At the end of John chapter 4, we have an episode with Jesus and a nobleman. Not so much is the spoken word of Jesus emphasized, but rather a work, a miraculous work, where actually heals a boy. And this takes place in Cana. So they're widely separated in geography. They're obviously separated in time, perhaps a matter of days or even a week. Certainly different circumstances. So what do they have to do with one another? The very nature of this sign that we focused on focuses the attention on Jesus as a prophet. The woman says, "I perceive that you are a prophet." And he proceeded to prove to her that as the Jewish Messiah, he certainly was a prophet. But every prophet, according to the Scriptures, especially the Messianic prophet, had to have other qualities. And we see that in Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 15 to 22. I would say that 15 to 20 to verse 20 focuses on the words of the prophet. 21 to 22 focus on the works of the prophet. "The Lord thy God will raise up unto thee a prophet from the midst of thee, of thy brethren like unto me. Unto him ye shall hearken according to all that thou desirest of the Lord thy God in Horeb, in the day of the assembly, saying, Let me not hear again the voice of the Lord my God, neither let me see this great fire any more, that I die not. And the Lord said unto me, They have well spoken that which they have spoken. I will raise them up a prophet from among their brethren like unto thee, and I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak unto them all that I shall command him. And it shall come to pass that whosoever will not hearken unto my words, which he shall speak in my name, I will require it of him. But the prophet who shall presume to speak a word in my name which I have not commanded him to speak, or who shall speak in the name of other gods, even that prophet shall die." So it's God's words God's words in the mouth of God's prophet, and this is the very thing that Jesus demonstrated in John chapter 4. I believe this is the sign of the prophet. Speaking God's words, the ability to express things that only God could know. Now verses 21 and 22. And if you shall say in your heart, how shall we know the word which the Lord hath not spoken, when a prophet speaketh in the name of the Lord, if the thing follow not, nor come to pass? That is the thing which the Lord has not spoken, but the prophet hath spoken it presumptuously. Thou shalt not be afraid of him. That has everything to do with John chapter 4, with Jesus and the nobleman in Cana healing the man's son. It's an excellent illustration of this truth that, well, if a skeptical reader was to read through John chapter 4, he might be a little skeptical as to if Jesus really was a prophet. But what is a prophet supposed to be able to do? He's supposed to predict whatever he says is supposed to come to pass, right? Well, that is the significance of the second episode in John chapter 4. I believe that's how they're related. You follow that? We have the words, and then we have a work that proves that what the prophet says actually comes to pass. So, I'm not sure how best to say that. Perhaps you could say that John chapter 4 verses 1 to 42 are Jesus, the sign of the prophet. And then in verses 43 to the end of the chapter, what is that? Verse 54 could be confirmation of the sign of a prophet. Follow? Sign of a prophet, that is speaking God's words. Confirmation or proof that he is a prophet, a genuine prophet, in the last section. I believe in our last class, as we were surveying the first section in John, first 42 verses, where Jesus talks with the woman and the people from Sychar. I don't think we quite got finished, and I'd like to just finish the outline. I'm not going to go through it in detail. There are a couple of things I'll bring to your attention that I'm going to leave for you to be able to do further study on, because I want to finish John 4 today. We have to do it. Right? We're running out of time. The first 7 verses are the setting for the sign. 7b through 26 is the manifestation of the sign. That's the outline so far. And in verses 27 to 42, the consequences or results of the sign. This is a logical summary. Setting, manifestation, and results. Do you have that? Twofold breakdown under the manifestation of the sign. In verses 7b through 15, Jesus tells the woman of a supernatural possibility. And in verses 16 to 26, Jesus tells the woman of historical and spiritual realities. So he's offering the woman eternal life, and then he actually brings her to the point where she understands it and accepts it. The consequence of the sign, let me give you a summary of that section in verses 27 to 42. I think that's where we left off. Here is a general outline. The consequences of the sign. In verses 27 to 30, Jesus converted the woman. This is proved by her actions, not so much by what Jesus did. Upon this came his disciples, and marveled that he talked with the woman, yet no man said, What seekest thou, or why talkest thou with her? The woman then left her water pot, and went her way into the city, and saith to the men, Come, see a man who told me all things that ever I did. Is not this the Christ? Then they went out of the city and came to him. a brief comment. What Dad was talking about in chapel yesterday, I think it is illustrated here. That what saving faith requires is repentance, right? Conversion is proof of faith, is it not? That's what James says, that if you want to be justified by men, that is in the eyes of your fellow human beings, there has to be some conversion of life. There has to be some works that prove your profession. Well, the woman had come originally to get water for herself. The very fact that she leaves her pot and goes to town proves that her motivation had changed. So we have actual conversion here, a change of mind. She's now interested in something much more significant. And she is inviting others, her friends, come. And she stresses the very thing that is the whole point of this whole episode, and that is stressing what Christ said. Come see a man who told me all things that ever I did is not this the Christ. That's the great significance of it. Now, verses 31 to 38, second result of this conversation that Jesus had with the woman is that he challenged the disciples. 31 to 38. Basically, we have a discussion here between Jesus and the disciples. In the meanwhile, his disciples besought him, saying, Master, eat. And he saith unto them, I have food to eat that you know not of. Therefore, said the disciples one to another, has any man brought him anything to eat? They're thinking, as Nicodemus was on an early occasion, on merely the earthly level. Jesus saith unto them, My food, my meat, is to do the will of him that sent me, and to finish his work. Say not ye, there are yet 4 months, and then cometh harvest? Behold, I say unto you, lift up your eyes, and look on the fields, for they are white already to harvest. And he that reapeth receives wages, and gathers fruit unto life eternal, that both he that sows and he that reaps may rejoice together. And here is that saying true. Notice another emphasis on the spoken word. He was proving his messiahship even to his own followers. Here is that saying true, one soweth and another reapeth. I sent you to reap that on which you bestowed no labor. Other men labored, and you are entered into their labors. I would like to point out before we leave these verses, 31 to 38, that throughout the Gospel of John, we note a development in Jesus' relationship to his disciples. In fact, I made this an assignment, and the last time I taught the course, I asked the students to trace the developing relationship between Jesus and the disciples. So far, what do we know about Jesus' relationship to his disciples from the first 3 chapters of John? Is there anything that we understand? Okay, they have chosen to follow. They only have partial understanding is a good point. How is that evidenced? Okay, they obviously haven't quite got the hang of this rabbi here, that he's not just interested in food, but everything he does seems to revolve around his spiritual mission. Well, in chapter 1, the disciples had witnessed Christ's general presence. 2 of them at least had witnessed his own personal presence. They had gone and spent a day with him. They had seen his wisdom and his kindness. They had heard him preach. In the miracle of water to wine in chapter 2, they had witnessed his glory. They had believed more in him. When they were with him down in Jerusalem at the end of chapter 2, they had witnessed his zeal and witnessed his great prophecy at Jerusalem. Of course, they didn't understand that yet. In the commentary that John adds in chapter 2, the disciples only believed or only came to understand the significance of that prophecy down in the temple. Early in the ministry, they only came to understand it after his resurrection. I believe that at least one of the disciples was with Jesus in his discussion with Nicodemus. We know from John chapter 3 and from the first part of this 4th chapter that Jesus had instructed them probably to baptize, and so they knew enough, they were committed enough, not only in following Christ themselves, but they were encouraging others to do the similar thing. So I really believe that Jesus' disciples did believe in him, and they viewed him as more important than John, that Christ had superseded John the Baptist. Certainly they probably sensed the increasing importance of the person of Christ, but they didn't understand that he was willing to deal with Samaritans, especially a woman. I don't think they understood that at all. No rabbi that they had ever met, probably, including John, had ever had dealings probably with the Gentiles. And so we have seen the disciples in 4 short chapters. Of course, this covers over a year. It's history. We've already touched on that in one of our other classes. If you pay attention to the chronological detail here, this is over a year. A third of the way through Jesus' public ministry, the disciples have moved from putting on personal faith in Christ to making a decision to follow Christ. And for the first time, here in John chapter 4, it seems as if Jesus is involving them in service. This is the first real teaching that Jesus has given, as far as John is concerned, on their involvement, sowing and reaping. Jesus says to them, I sent you to reap. Now, what he's referring to there, I'm not quite sure. Whether he's referring back to something he said at one of their original commissions when he called them from the boats or whatever, I don't know. But we certainly have a transition here from just following to actually serving. And they went in with him. And it doesn't say the disciples had a very active part here in Sychar. No evidence of it all. In fact, it's some time before we find them doing anything. Although if we were to do a harmonistic study of where this situation fits in the rest of the Gospels, we may find that in the Synoptic Gospels that perhaps Jesus was already involved in them in a more detailed way. So this was obviously a result of Jesus speaking to the woman, was that he challenged his disciples. The third and final result of Jesus' ministry to the woman is found in verses 39 to 42. Jesus converted the people. He converted the woman, he challenged the disciples, and he converted the people. We find a twofold response on the people's part. In verses 39, the first part of verse 40, we find an immediate response because of the woman's testimony. Many of the Samaritans of that city believed on Jesus for the saying of the woman who testified. And here we have it again. In my Bible, I have circled. You should highlight these phrases. He told me all that ever I did. If there's anything that you need to get, it's that data. The reference to the prophet in verse 19. The reference in verse 22 that Jesus said, you do not know, but we know. the woman's statement in verse 25 that the Messiah would tell us all things. The statement in verse 29 that she made when she goes to town, he told me all things that ever I did. Is not this the Christ? And her statement again repeated in verse 39, he told me all that ever I did. Now this is what you're looking for when you're doing grassroots Bible study. You're looking for repeated phrases, repeated emphasis on a theme. And that is what tells me that this is really what this whole thing in the first 42 verses of John 4 is about. Significant reference to Jesus telling everything to this woman, everything of significance to this woman, her personal life, her theology, and truth about himself. And so when the Samaritans were come to him, they besought him that he would tarry with them, and he abode there 2 days. So the immediate response was that the people believed because of the woman's testimony. Then 41 and 42, the people believed eventually because of Jesus' testimony. Many more believed because of his own word, and said unto the woman, now we believe, not because of your saying. You notice that even here there's a transition from the woman's testimony to Jesus' testimony. Jesus' testimony is much more effective. Same thing with John the Baptist. John said, you bear me witness what I'm saying. Hey, he must increase, I must decrease. And so John the Baptist was pointing people to Christ's testimony. We see this. Now we believe not because of your saying, for we have heard him ourselves and know that this is indeed the Christ, the Savior of the world. What was the result of people listening to Jesus, as recorded in John chapter 4? What conclusion did the woman draw? Christ, specifically. What conclusion did the Sycharites draw? This is the Christ. Right? And so Jesus' words witness that he is the Christ. That's John 4. That's the primary sign. The sign of the prophet. Telling all things, convincing people that he is the Christ. Now, if he's really Messiah, if he's really the prophet of Deuteronomy, and they're one and the same, by the way, in the Jewish mind, the prophet of Deuteronomy 18 is synonymous with Messiah. Do I need to prove that to you? Look at verse 21 of John chapter 1. When the Pharisees came to find out who John the Baptist was, they asked him, what then, are you Elijah? And he said, I am not. Are you that prophet? And he answered, no. They're alluding back to Deuteronomy chapter 18. In John chapter 6, verse 14, after Jesus fed 5,000 people, then those men, when they had seen the miracle which Jesus did, said, this is of a truth that prophet that should come into the world. They were looking for the prophet, see? And John chapter 7, verse 40. After Jesus had stood up in the feast and preached such great words, many of the people, therefore, when they heard this saying, said, of a truth, this is the prophet. Others said, this is the Christ. Right? Maybe that proves that not everybody had made synonymous prophet with Christ. But there is no doubt that in the Jewish mind, the prophet was someone of great significance. Now this morning I'm going to get you to make an outline of John chapter 4. I've told you what the point of connection is. What is the point of connection? Please review that. between the first two seemingly unrelated events. One are the claims of the prophet, the words of the prophet, and the other is the works that confirm the predictions. Predictions confirmed. Let's read it. I'll just read 43 to the end of the chapter. And while we're reading it, the first thing I would like you to do is make a few notations. Just make 3 columns on your page or on a scrap piece of paper. I'd like you to do this. I'd like you to make a geography column, a biographical column, and a chronological column. Right? Place, people, time. Right? Let's summarize this event. Who, where, and when. This is what you have to do. Now, after 2 days, verse 43, Jesus departed from there and went into Galilee. So there you have it. 2 days later, in Galilee, we have Jesus. For Jesus himself testified that a prophet has no honor in his own country. Isn't that interesting? That this idea of prophet is still continuing on. Then when he was come into Galilee, the Galileans received him, having seen all the things that he did at Jerusalem at the feast, for they also went unto the feast. So just put your data down first. Verse 43, he moves into Galilee. He's still in Galilee in verse 45. And then verse 46, then Jesus came again into Cana of Galilee. Now a little more specific data given. So starting in 46, he's in Cana, where he made the water wine. And there was a certain nobleman. So Jesus is the nobleman whose son was sick at Capernaum. So the 3 major players here, Jesus, the man, and the son. When the man heard that Jesus was come out of Judea into Galilee, he went to him and besought him that he would come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. Down is literal here. Cana is in the highlands. Capernaum is right on the shore of Galilee. So that he wanted Jesus to go down to the edge of the lake and heal his son. Then said Jesus unto him, except ye see signs and wonders, ye will not believe. The nobleman said unto him, Sir, come down before my child dies. Jesus said unto him, Go thy way, thy son lives. And the man believed the word which Jesus had spoken unto him, and he went his way. And as he was now going down, his servants met him and told him, saying, Thy son liveth. Then inquired he of them the hour when he began to improve. And they said unto him, Yesterday, at the 7th hour, the fever left him. So there you have a reference. The reference to the 7th hour is when verses 47 to 50. 47 to 50 actually occur in the 7th hour of day 1, and verses 51 to 53, or the first part of 53, are day 2. He's on his way home the next day. He meets his servants, and they tell him that it was yesterday at a certain time that the fever left the boy. So the father knew that it was at the same hour in which Jesus said unto him, Thy son liveth. And he himself believed, and his whole house. This is again the second miracle that Jesus did when he was come out of Judea into Galilee. Now, you should have drawn enough data out of there to divide this text, verses 43 to 54, into at least 3 divisions. All right? Geographically, what are the 3 divisions? Not Judea. He's not in Judea. No, it says not in Judea. Pardon? Yes. All right. So in verses 43 to 45, Jesus moves from Sychar into Galilee. General background. 46 to 50 occurs in Cana. That's where Jesus and the man are. And then verses 51 to 53, the action is tracing from Cana to Capernaum. Verse 54 is commentary. It doesn't, as far as the events of the narrative go, it's not telling us. It's not a lot of order. Okay, same 3 division. Can you place the people involved? All right. Okay, so in the middle, in verses 46 to 50, while Jesus is actually in Cana, he's dealing with a nobleman regarding the nobleman's son. It's obvious, although they're not stated, that the disciples are with Jesus. Are they not? I mean, how do we know about this? Remember John chapter 20, the key verse of the book? Many other signs truly did Jesus in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded, but these are. So we can assume that the disciples were there for all of these, or at least one of them was. And then 51 to 53, as Tracy has said, is the nobleman's servants and his son and his family. Okay. Could you just take that vital information and make a threefold summary of the historical events here? Could you summarize versus make an outline, basically, of 43 to 54? It's not really hard to make up an outline if you use these keys. We've already got a threefold division. Can you play with the words a little bit and just come up with headings for these 3 groupings? Ten brownie points to the person that gets the first. Quick, quick. Well, perhaps you need to logically analyze what is happening. That would help. What do we actually have in verses 43 to 47? Or perhaps 46, or wherever you want to break it there. At least 43 to 45. What is that? Why is that information given to us? It's background narrative. It's placing the setting, right? Even Louis L'Amour has to make a setting for his story, right? It doesn't make any sense if you have a drama without, painting a picture, right? So you could even include verse 46 as part of the setting if you wish. We have the general setting in 43 to 45, and then you have the specific setting in 46 to the beginning of 47. What starts in 48 and continues unto, what's actually happening. What's a word that describes the difference between background narrative and what is happening starting in 48? You actually have a dialogue. You have an edited, condensed summary of a discussion. Or do we have a discussion here, or more than one discussion? Well, who is involved in the first discussion? Well, where? Perhaps, right? But certainly, if you were a movie director, you would probably have Jesus speaking to a group of people, but that who steps forward immediately? Yes, it becomes a discussion between Jesus and the one man. Right? The next, what is the difference between this discussion and the following discussion? Okay, Jesus isn't even there, right? It's really a discussion between the secondary players, right? Now, let me suggest an outline for you. Perhaps 43 to 47 could be the background or the setting for the confirmation of Jesus' sign of a prophet. This is where it took place and when and who was involved, what the issues were. 48 to 50 give us the first discussion of that day, on that particular day, and the results. The man left. He says he believed and he left. In verses 51 to 53, we have the second discussion, the next day, and the result of that. Does that make sense? And in verse 54, you have a commentary on the sign. John's commentary. Now, in your own mind, are you convinced, absolutely? Is it clear in your thinking that this miracle that Jesus did, now this miracle involved both words from the mouth of Jesus and a miraculous work, did it not? Can anyone see that or not see that? Obviously, the miracle involved Jesus speaking and involved him doing. Is it clear in everybody's mind how this particular miracle illustrates or parallels Deuteronomy 18? Can you see that? Can you see the point of significance? The nature of the miracle is such that the very words prophesied out of the mouth of this man who was in the background to this very sign said to be a prophet. You see? The prophet comes into his own country and he expects opposition. What he finds is a man who does believe his words. So Jesus predicts the man's son will be healed. It's not until the next day that the man actually sees that what was predicted actually comes to pass. So, in the Jewish mind, Deuteronomy 18, prophet. How do you know a man is a prophet? If his prophecy is confirmed by the fulfillment, by fulfillment. In this case, the prophet's prediction was confirmed, is it not? And it says that the man believed at the instant Jesus made the prediction. It also says that he believed again, doesn't it? Verse 53, so the father knew that it was at the same hour in which Jesus said unto him, thy son liveth, and he himself believed. Well, he'd already believed. I haven't checked if it's a different Greek word there, or if it's the strengthened form of the verb, but it may be significant. Can you envision that your belief would be embellished or strengthened similarly? I mean, I guess it's an obvious question. I believe that that Jesus Christ is going to return in the air someday, and I'm going to be caught up together with him in the clouds. Do you believe that? Yes, you do. At the very instant after it happens, are you going to believe it any more than you believe it now? It's the belief that comes from confirmed faith, fulfilled promises. So now I don't think it's even necessary for us to even exposit this now, because I think we have. Don't view this second miracle at the end of John chapter 4 as unrelated to the events in Sychar. That brings out the great significance of both, does it not? You'll notice that the word prophet occurs in each event. Prophet occurs in verse 19 where the woman says, I perceive that you are a prophet. And in the background information in verse 44 to the second episode, Jesus himself testified that a prophet hath no honor in his own country. Now, I don't think it's an accident at all that that word prophet is in the second episode. It could have easily been left out. It wasn't actually a word that was used in the duration of the conversations itself, was it? I think what John is doing, the guy who wrote this book, is he is, in his mind's eye, he was going through everything that was said, and on his way into Galilee, Jesus must have mentioned this business about a prophet. And then it dawned on John, here's a connection. Here's a point of connection. I'm sure that's why John was led to put that reference, seemingly innocuous reference to a prophet being dishonored because it tied the two events together. Sign of a prophet, telling all things. And eventually having his prophecies confirmed by fulfillment. Now, I'm going to give you a special assignment for next class. We're going to move on to chapter 5. And I want you to put some diligent effort into this time, okay? By the way, I'm still going to mark you on that assignment. You were supposed to have done some analysis of John chapter 4, breaking that down into its sections. That was an assignment I gave to you, and nobody handed it in. At least I don't recall anybody handed it in. It's part of your marks. This one is likewise part of your responsibility. I want you to come to John chapter 5, and I want you to do two things. I want you to break down, I want you to come up with an outline or divisions of John chapter 5 verses 17 to 47. There's 30 verses there. And I think you won't have difficulty coming up with that. So number one, for next class, I want an outline of 517 to 547. Break it down. I want you to use your approaches and see if you can't. And I would tell you right now that I think one of the most useful approaches that you will find for that section and dividing that section up is the logical and the topical. Logical and topical. Make a note of the topical. All right? The topical approach. You've got to look for the subject matter that is repeated, and it'll help you. Now use a plain text Bible, okay? Plain text, and do your own. Now, to help you, I want you to do grammatical analysis of the same section. Okay? That's the second part of the assignment. I want you, that's probably the first thing you should do, is do a grammatical analysis of 517 to 47 for next class. And to help you with that, let me show you how you do grammatical analysis. We haven't touched on this yet in the core assembly. Remember way back in the beginning when I first introduced you to the methods of analysis and correlation?